The Sasebo slashing is considered one of the grisliest murders to have ever happened in Sasebo, Japan, as it involves the murder of a 12-year-old girl, and the murderer was someone from her own school. Sometime during the spring of 2004, a young 12-year-old girl by the name of Satomi Mitarai was best friends with her very own murderer, an 11-year-old classmate who has remained unnamed from all media outlets as per Japanese laws. You see, these laws don't allow minors convicted of crimes to be revealed to the public, so many people have referred to her as Girl A. It's how she's been referred to since the crime, and it's how we'll refer to her for the rest of this video, although I should state that her name has already been made public due to a little error a news crew made while documenting the crime. When showcasing one of her drawings on Fuji TV, the broadcasters forgot or simply didn't see the name written next to the drawing and ended up not censoring her identity. Yet, for convenience sake, I will not refer to her by her real name and instead only call her Girl A. Her real name will be revealed towards the end of this video, but for now, that's just what we're gonna name her. Girl A and Satomi were good friends, allegedly, and this horrific crime occurred due to a supposed altercation between the two. Apparently, Satomi had bullied Girl A via Girl A's website, where she made fan fictions on the movie Battle Royale and had content relating to horror flash animation / urban legend called The Red Room. On her website, Satomi wrote deprecating comments regarding Girl A's weight and how she's too much of a goody-goody, which in Japan is super offensive, I guess. Shortly after this, Girl A brought a box cutter from home to school. Girl A lured Satomi into an empty room where beforehand she had actually closed the blinds, sat her down in a chair, and taped her up, where she had then slit Satomi's throat open and then sliced deep into her arms. After about a few good minutes, Girl A actually kicked Satomi while she was on the floor to make sure that she was dead, and just being shocked by it all, she just stood there for another 10 minutes or so, where she had then gotten a teacher, still bloodied up in her clothes and everything, and told her teacher about the gruesome murder she had just committed. Shortly thereafter, they found Girl A and brought her in. It didn't take very long for her to confess her crimes, and she was fully aware of what she had done and the severity of her crime, sobbing uncontrollably and apologizing profusely. She spent the night at the police station, refusing any sort of snacks or drinks, and she really had a hard time communicating with any of the police officers. Even though she had already admitted that she committed the crime, nobody really knew why. Because of her troubles with speaking to the police, she was then evaluated by a police psychologist, and while she didn't suffer from any sort of mental illness, it is widely believed that she has suffered from hikikomori syndrome, which is this phenomenon in Japan that describes people that are closed off from the rest of the world and do not leave their homes. It's a severe social withdrawal that is a very cultural thing in Japan and often affects people in their adolescence or just young adults, though it can affect people who are much older. Yet of course, even though this has a name in Japan, that doesn't necessarily mean that this only happens in Japan. There's several different kinds of people like that here in the Western world, and even though we don't have a name for it, it can be described as somewhat a form of depression or perhaps even anxiety disorder. Then later, there was a diagnosis into Girl A after the murder had occurred, which showed that she had Asperger's syndrome, which can be evident in her heavy obsession with certain topics and subject matters, as well as her difficulty communicating with people. In this case, other than her obsession towards Battle Royale, an already bloody and violent movie, she had been very fascinated with darker corners of the internet subcultures, such as gory websites, urban legends, and was even intrigued by Guro, a genre of art that emphasizes on eroticism, violence, corruption, and grotesque imagery all around. It's almost like a fetishization of blood and gruesome stuff without really any expression of pain or suffering. And although her website doesn't exist now, it was apparently to be described as excessively violent and gory, what with her hyperlinking bizarre ASCII art and shock flash animations. It was also designed around the early 2000s urban legend of the Red Room, which I had mentioned earlier, and as legend has it, it's a chainmail or message that you would receive that needed to be passed on, or else you will face a horrible and tragic death. Of course, this isn't real, but with more recent rise of social media and a lot of people that are claiming that the Red Room is now a live stream of people being murdered or mutilated on camera, well, more people are inclined to believe it. We're kind of derailing from our main subject here, though it is important to note that Girl A's involvement with this murder has always been linked with the Red Room urban legend, and everybody always cites the Red Room as sort of a curse that inflicted Girl A's obsession with gore and whatever and made her basically kill her friend. Although we're going to use Occam's razor here and just say that Girl A's obsession towards these kinds of imageries must have warped her mind into thinking that this sort of thing was normal, and her refusal to be, well, social with other people only degraded her mental health even further. It was also shown that Girl A had violent tendencies before and had physically abused her classmates by kicking, punching, and there was even an incident prior to the murders where she had a knife in her hands. It was inevitable that she would commit these crimes, and although hindsight is 20/20, unless her mental health and her obsessions calmed down in the future, things wouldn't have been better. It may be easy to predict these things now, but the one thing that people never could have predicted was the online reaction and the, well, for the lack of a better term, fan base she would later accrue. Girl A quickly became an internet meme in Japan and more popularized in Futaba Channel, also known as 2chan. This may be a shock to a lot of people, but let's be honest, lonely weebs living with their mothers are always going to find reasons to idolize whatever girl looks remotely interesting to them or looks slightly like an anime girl. I don't know. It's online where Girl A's murders were romanticized and quickly spread throughout the internet, quickly turning her into a meme where she was referred to as Nevada-tan. The name comes from the girl's class photo of her wearing a sweater originating from the University of Nevada, and the suffix tan is more like a childlike version of saying chan. Fan art was soon made of her, making her out to be a sort of chibi-like anime girl with this signature box cutter she used during the murder and the bloody sweater that she has. There was also songs made about her, such as Cutie Nevada, and if you don't already know, this is a reference to Cutie Honey's theme song, which sounds exactly like this except with the lyrics completely twisted up. And her website, while taken down today, skyrocketed in popularity and was quickly mirrored online as soon as it was gone. There are even some cosplayers that have dressed themselves up as Girl A. The spontaneous popularity of Girl A even spread to the University of Nevada itself, where the same sweater became their highest selling item. Catching wind of this meme, UON decided to go ahead and temporarily remove the Nevada sweater. Soon thereafter, her notoriety was caught by people on 4chan, and the meme spread all throughout the US and subsequently the entire world. Because of the internet's morbid curiosity, people online soon found her real name when it was erroneously uncensored whilst showing her art on television. Now, as bizarre as her internet fame was, and probably still is, it's important to note that while these memes were based off of real life events and are horribly tasteless, they never really went so far as to being just memes. There was, as far as I know, no harassment towards the victim's family, nor towards the family of Girl A. It's a morbid fascination of a criminal, which is something that can be seen with most popular criminals even throughout all of history. And while these criminals in particular have never been made into, I don't know, cosplays or little lolly girls, whatever, people's fascination and sometimes adoration for these murderers are nonetheless always there. But does that make this okay? I mean, no, not at all. The fact of the matter is that, in a way, it's celebrating the death of a little girl, someone who actually died. Whether you take it as a joke or not, I mean, the implications are still there. It's talking about a very serious subject, an actual grisly murder that happened in real life. Harmless isn't really a word I would use to describe this meme. Cruel and tasteless is more like it, but malicious and perhaps even harassment towards the family, well, again, I don't really know for sure. I can only tell you what I've researched personally. I can only hope there was no harassment towards the family because of this meme. While I'm sure they're completely aware of it, I cannot for sure tell you what exactly their reaction was or what exactly happened to them after this meme became viral. But there's a few more interesting tidbits on Girl A that I would like to mention. Local authorities have sentenced her to 4 years in prison for involuntary commitment. At first she was there for 2 years, but then they extended it for another 2 years for the same exact reason. She was then given a graduation certificate by her school, as the council there thought it'd be a good way for her to reintegrate into society, as every child in Japan needs one in order to enter junior high. Now, supposedly she was released in 2008, although I get mixed reports of her being released much later, sometime in 2017 for example. Either way, she isn't currently being imprisoned. She should be around 27 or 28 around 2020 now. And while researching Nevada-tan, or Girl A, I was able to find this interesting little post found in Amino, where someone claims that Girl A is their aunt. Now, I'm not going to take this too seriously, seeing as how, well, first of all, it's in Amino, and secondly, this entire post is just someone copying and pasting different articles and info dumps on the murders, and just pasting it on the article itself. It really doesn't give us any sort of information whatsoever. And also the author is named Jaden White. That's not a very Japanese name, but hey, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're an American, and maybe, I don't know, probably not. I have no idea. Though this post did pique my interest and had me digging around. Whatever did happen to Girl A? Is she still in jail? Is she still alive? Well, I was led to 2 different websites, one being Twitter. This Twitter account, named after the murderer herself, Natsumi Tsuji, has been up since 2017, and her last post was in February 2018. Some of her posts allude to the incident, such as her remark of hating school and saying how she is free now. Her very first post was just a tweet of her saying she's sorry in Japanese, in reference to how she's constantly saying that she's sorry when she was first captured. So is this Nevada-tan's Twitter account? I highly doubt it. Chances are it was some person trying to make a creepy account and tapered off towards the end, either because they were just bored of the account or because nobody actually noticed them. Even if that weren't the case, it's still pretty obvious to see that this isn't really Natsumi Tsuji. For one, their reference to the old murders are just, well, nothing more than that, just references. If Nevada-tan really did have an account, I'd suspect she'd want to keep her head down and not bring any attention to herself, unless of course she really is a psychopath. The next incriminating evidence is her likes, which is the first thing that really caught my eye because they kind of seem out of context or something that Japanese people wouldn't really be interested in. Like, for example, one of her likes is from a GameSpot post on the Deadpool movie. Like, what? And also, if that doesn't tell you that this is fake, she also liked a tweet about some Civil War thing. And it's like, I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking that whoever owns this account is probably just some old, sweaty 30-year-old American who has really nothing better to do other than Google Translate some Japanese and to make vague tweets. So while this one is fake, the next one I'm going to be talking about has a much more interesting lead. There was a post made on 4chan sometime in 2018 where somebody inquired about the details of Nevada-tan. Someone replied with this post stating that Nevada-tan is currently happily married and has since changed her name, and also apparently she's suffering from cancer. The link posted unfortunately leads to a dead article on a Japanese website, so it's hard to determine if this was ever true or not. Well, thank God for the Wayback Machine. Now, this part of the video is a bit of a dichotomy to the previous part, and it's something I didn't really expect out of my research. When I read this article, bearing in mind that this was completely translated in Google Translate, so some of the stuff I read might be completely misinterpreted, and also keeping in mind that this could be totally fabricated and the legitimacy of this article could be completely made up, I overall found myself reading something I didn't expect. According to this website and many other sources, there was some heavy criticism towards the police force tasked with this. And it's not just the sexist comments that I'm sure you've all heard about made by one police officer who claimed that this was a very manly crime, but also because of the fact that in Japanese culture, it often seems like the Japanese care more about the criminal and their human rights as opposed to the victims. The victim was Satomi Mitarai, and her family was constantly chased by the media and wasn't ever given time to grieve. On the opposite side, Natsumi Tsuji, who was, of course, Girl A, was being protected. Never once was she asked any questions by the public, and though she wanted to apologize to the family, she never had the chance, and her father, someone who was facing illness due to a previous brain injury, was the one who had to make the statement of apology. Natsumi, after being released from prison, was able to live a normal, happy life afterwards. She attended junior high normally and graduated without anyone knowing who she was, and she was protected under law. Her name was changed and nobody ever knew who she was. Surprisingly, this incident actually brought her closer to her family than ever before. She was a loner, that much we already knew, but she was also obsessed with things online and the internet, so she would always recluse back to her room and just absorb any sort of content online when faced with stress or anything remotely upsetting. While in junior high, she was doing pretty well with her grades, but then they started to dip. After a little altercation with her family involving her grades, she stormed back to her room, dug up info on the victims and the family, and read into who they were: the father, the mother, everyone in the family. The family that belonged to the little girl that she had killed, and it was then and there that she had cried and realized that she needed to be a better person. She stated that it was a perfect redo for her family relationship, and it was also a perfect way to view herself and self-reflect on who she was and who she's going to be. But one thing was always there to haunt her. She could never redo the past as much as she was able to redo herself and her family. What happened has happened, and she could never bring that back. What didn't help was that she was constantly barraged with multiple letters every day in support of Nevada-tan, or in this case, Natsumi. This sort of response online actually got a lot of people in Japan concerned, and it made people wonder what exactly the future of Japanese society had to hold if they were going to idolize a child murderer, though this idolization was not lost to Natsumi, and in the end, at first, it did make her feel like a star, even if it was just for a bit. But there was one thing that really kind of took me aback, and no, it's not the fact that Natsumi actually does have older siblings that have kids, so maybe the whole aunt theory might be true. No, it was when she talked about her Asperger's. See, for someone like her, going through Asperger's is difficult because it's not some disorder that can be visibly seen, or doesn't mean that someone is dumber for having it. It simply means that she had troubles developing as she grew older. She acknowledges this and even goes through the three main things people with Asperger's usually have trouble developing, that being communications, relationships, and of course, focus. And she goes through each of these developmental issues briefly and describes what it's like to suffer through this. But the true suffering of having these kinds of disorders come from the worldview of others. Like she says, it's not just something you can see in people. When people see someone who acts differently, their first instinct is to tell themselves that they're just weird people, or they're just different, or maybe even unusual, not really worth our time. But Natsumi fears most of all that people who go through Asperger's in particular develop secondary conditions such as depression, anxiety, panic disorders, withdrawal, addiction, and even violent tendencies. In Japan, mental disorders aren't really something they're quite keen on helping. They're one of the leading countries in suicide, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and a large list of disorders that are heavily ignored. It only just recently got better. Within the past few years, these mental disorders are beginning to be tackled in Japan. It's something not only people are being acknowledged for and treated for, but it's also something that is starting to change in the public's eye, because for a while now, there is this mindset of people in the society of Japan that, well, anybody who seeks psychiatric help are either crazy, insane lunatics, or are weak. This perspective changed quite a bit, but only in the past few years. So now that leads to the ultimate question. If she had sought help earlier for her mental disorder, would Natsumi have committed the crime? It's hard to say, really, and there's no point speculating, because what's done is done. I'm not trying to pity the criminal. What Natsumi did can never be forgiven, yet everything surrounding this case can't be ignored. Asperger's isn't an excuse, nor is it a way to vilify people. People with Asperger's can live happy, normal lives, and they will never actually be tainted by these dark thoughts and actions. Those kinds of people, well, they are far gone. Asperger's doesn't make you a murderer, It's just something that makes life a little bit more difficult. And it's not an excuse. You can't put a bandage over a crime you did just because you have a mental disorder. Yet the attitude towards mental health needed to be changed. And not just in Japan, but all around the world. It's not something people are willing to accept as something to be fixed or to seek help for. What Natsumi said rings true to everyone, and it'd be unwise to also ignore Natsumi's motives, which was to go against someone she considered to be a bully. I'm not saying that she should be excused for killing just because she was bullied, but bullying is also a problem that's prevalent in all societies. It's something that should also be addressed and dealt with appropriately. What has happened, and what has been done cannot be forgiven. Yet it's not forgiveness, I believe, that should be sought after. I mean, after all, the family of Natsumi Tsuji is currently giving the other family of the victim cards monthly saying how sorry they are. And they've been doing this every single month for the past 15 or so years. There's even a book written by, I believe, a relative or perhaps someone connected to the victim's family. It talks about their experience during the murder and how exactly they grieved as a family together and all the other experiences that they had. And the book is titled, well, roughly translated through Google Translate, "If You Apologize, You Can Come Back Home." I really wish I could read this book, but it's in Japanese, so I have no idea what it says. Whether or not they forgive each other is all up to them. But for us, I think, ultimately, this is a story of understanding how we as people can do better in the future, how we respond to this kind of tragedy. Recognizing mental health disorders, mental health sicknesses, illnesses, and of course, addressing the problems of bullying, that's probably a first step to prevent anything else like this from happening. And if you're someone who suffers from any sort of mental disorders or mental illnesses, get some help. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not weaker for doing that, and you're definitely not crazy for doing that. In fact, that shows that you're sane enough to know that you need that help, and that, well, now's a good time to seek that help. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. I love you guys so much. Goodbye.